These first few encounters all took place in Minnesota. Therefore, I won't be mentioning the name of the state unless there is a change in that regard. The first encounter took place in Otter Tail County, submitted by a person who seems to want to remain anonymous. I'll start off by saying that I have never believed in any of these sort of creatures, but I saw something in early 2009 that really disturbed me and is making me change my mind. I was not under the influence of any drugs, and I have better than average eyesight, and the lighting was nearing sunset, but I was still able to see clearly. I live in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is in west-central Minnesota, about an hour drive from Fargo, North Dakota. My mother-in-law lives out in the country, about 3 to 4 miles out of Fergus Falls, and I was staying there while my wife and her mother went shopping in town. They called me and asked if I wanted to go to a 7 p.m. movie, so I left the house at about 6:30 to meet them at the theater. About 2 miles from their house on a country road known as the Wendell Road, along the Mustinka River, I saw 3 white-tailed deer. 2 of the deer were rather small, probably just yearlings and a larger doe, who I assumed was their mother. Being an avid hunter, lover of wildlife, and future wildlife biologist, I stopped to look at the deer. I should also mention that I hunt in the area and have spent my whole life in the Fergus Falls area. The deer were following a small creek bed, which is in fact the Mustinka River, so there were hardly any trees, except for one. Maybe because I didn't see it there because of the tree, but I just noticed something crouching behind the tree on my side of the road, looking at the deer, and to my belief, hunting them. It just sat there, looking at the deer, taking no notice of me, even though I was in my truck, no more than 40 yards away, with a clear view, with nothing obstructing my view of it. It had one hand on the tree that it was bracing itself with. What struck me as shocking was the fact that it seemed to be a 2-legged creature and not a 4-legged one. Its hands appeared to have opposable thumbs and were rather slender and long, very unlike a wolf. The creature looked as though if it stood upright, it would be over 7 feet tall, with a protruding muzzle, broad shoulders, a slender waist, and thick, muscular thighs. As there was snow on the ground, I couldn't see the feet. It had a deep, dark brown color throughout its body. After several seconds of looking at the creature in utter shock, the deer ran off. Then, something amazing happened. It looked right at me, as though blaming me for losing its meal. It just sat there, looking at me and blinking but not moving. This scared the crap out of me, so I hit the gas pedal and drove off. It was very dark after the movie, so I didn't much feel like trudging through the 3.5 feet of snow with the possibility of a monster lurking in the area that is currently looking for a meal that I scared off. So, at about 10 a.m., I went back there and walked down to the tree. Under the tree, there was no snow, so there were no tracks that I could see. But leading up to the tree, there were 3 tracks leading in from my grandmother-in-law's field, which was hard, black dirt. And if you know what a Minnesota field looks like in late winter, early spring, you can't make anything out of the dirt. The tracks I did find were only about 6 to 7 inches in length, but were clearly canine prints, with the exception of 4 toe-looking marks in the snow. And that's my story. Next up, an encounter set in St. Louis County, and reportedly took place in early September of 1999, submitted by a person who remains anonymous. First off, I would like to keep my name confidential, seeing as this happened on an Air Force base and I don't know who reads this stuff. This happened sometime in September of '99. I forget the exact date. It was early in the month though, somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m. I was a Security Forces Airman, working 3rd shift on base patrol. Now mind you, this is an Air National Guard base that I worked at full-time. It's on the north side of Duluth, MN, next to the International Airport. North to northeast of the base is nothing but large wooded areas. 3rd shift on the base was pretty boring and lasted from 10 to 6 a.m. We full-timers worked a skeleton crew, usually only 5 to 6 of us on 3rd shift. I was in the patrol truck, doing my usual rounds checking doors and fence lines. Late at night, on the north side of the base was usually creepy enough when patrolling by yourself. Anyways, I was on this road, driving towards our baseball field, when my headlights caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me. They were almost eye level with me, and I was sitting in an F-150. Around this time, a few of the guys had been seeing this huge buck around the property, something like a 16-pointer or something around that size. I was about 80 yards out when I saw these eyes reflecting back at me, so I'm thinking it was a big deer. I gotta see this thing. So I hit the gas and started speeding towards the field. This is where it all happened so fast. It's almost hard to explain. There was a little slope behind the baseball field. It sloped down, probably about 12-15 feet, into a brush line. The brush went about 30 feet, then turned into a thick tree line. The brush was probably about armpit high and pretty tough to traverse through, being so thick. As I turned into the baseball field and turned the truck towards the thing, I just caught the rear end of the thing leaping down the slope, below the line of sight of my headlights. The thing was no more than about 20 feet ahead of me when it leaped. All I got was a look at the back end of it, and it was big. The best I can do to describe it is to say that it was wolf/dog-like in nature. It had a long tail. I'd say longer than 2 feet. The hind legs looked exactly like that of a dog's. Same with the back paws, but they were huge. They were bigger than my hands for sure. The hair/fur was wavy, yet matted and thick. The color was blondish or very light brown. I didn't notice any gray in it, but this all happened within about 2-3 seconds. I sat in my patrol truck for a couple of seconds, confused and thinking, I know what I saw, but it couldn't have been what I saw. So I hopped out with my flashlight, an M16 rifle, and walked to the edge of the slope. All I heard was the thing running through the woods in front of me, heading in a northwest direction. And this thing sounded like a moose charging through the trees. It made a lot of noise. That's when I started to get really scared, thinking, if this is some sort of wolf or whatever it could be, my M16 isn't going to do a thing to this animal. So I jumped back into my patrol truck as fast as I could and headed back to the SF headquarters. I never told any of the other members about this, for fear of ridicule or being called crazy. There is no way I misidentified this thing. I'm a trained observer, an avid hunter, and in the past I've worked with animal rehabilitation with the Minnesota DNR. I know my animals in the North Woods extremely well. I saw exactly what I saw, and that was the back end of a large wolf/dog thing that basically had its eyes level with mine while I was in a patrol truck. The back end was definitely much larger than any of the largest deer or black bears I've seen. The points I remember the clearest were the tail and back paws, as well as the texture and color of the hair, or fur, if you will. This is my story. I have never told it to anyone, in fear of ridicule. I swear it to be the truth. The next one took place in Washington County, anonymously submitted and supposedly took place the 28th of June, 1997. It was the summer of '97 and I was 13 years old. I was rollerblading from a part of town called Old Cottage Grove. I guess I should start off by saying that the city where this happened was a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota called Cottage Grove. It was around 9:30 p.m. and I was rollerblading back home from a girlfriend's house with a friend. We were just coming around a bend in the road that went past a farm that I believe, at the time, was called Green Acres Farm. I'm not exactly sure what it was they did at that farm, but I do know that at the time there were always cattle of all different ages, sizes, and genders. Which brings me to the conclusion that maybe I was just at the right place at the wrong time. As I was rounding the bend in the road to start coming up the hill, I felt a very strong sense of fear. It was like my body was telling me to get the heck out of there. Yet I couldn't figure out why. I can tell you this much, though. For the first and only time in my life, I felt like I was no longer at the top of the food chain. Right when I started to pick up the pace to get out of there is when I heard a sound that came from the fenced-in cattle farm to my left, maybe 15 to 20 yards behind me. It sounded like nails grabbing a pole or fence, followed by what sounded like what a dog's paws and claws sound like when walking or running on a tile floor. Except this just sounded like a quick leap on the street's pavement. As I turned around to look, there stood what looked to be a wiry, gray-haired werewolf. It was like time stopped. At the time, there was a street light in the woods, maybe 5 feet behind it. So all I could make out was a silhouette of this monster. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with the head of what looked like a German shepherd, with huge ears and a huge muzzle. I could see this thing was built like a bodybuilder. It stood bipedally like a man, not like what some folks say with these things having dog-like limbs. It had long, slim hands with black nails on its fingertips. It had a slim waist, but its upper body was muscular beyond belief. The thing that always stuck with me, besides the point of seeing this thing in the first place, was that his head was turned to the side and snout up in the air. The one thing that really stuck out and was out of place to me was that I could see this thing breathe as though it was winter, but mind you, it was the end of June, almost July. It looked as though it was smelling my scent, but that's just what it looked like. I'm not positive on that. Before I knew it, I was yelling to my friend to get the heck out of there and not to look back, but it's almost as though he was in another world because he didn't seem to feel, let alone see what I had just experienced. I'm somewhat of an artist and drew a picture of what I saw, which was a werewolf. Fast forward 17 years, and I still hadn't told anyone about this encounter. That is until my oldest brother and I were trading stories one summer evening, and it just sort of came up as we were talking about Bigfoot. Mind you, my brother's a firm believer in this animal. So, I said the heck with it and started telling him about what happened to me, going to the point of pulling out the original drawing I drew of it. To my surprise, he didn't look at me or laugh at me like I was positive he would have. Instead, he started asking me if I had ever heard of the Michigan Dogman or seen anything on it, which I replied no. He then pulled up an image on the internet of a sketch that an eyewitness had drawn, and I swear to you it sent shivers down my spine, because it not only looked like my drawing, it looked exactly like the thing I saw that night in the summer of 1997 in Old Cottage Grove, Minnesota. To this day, I still find myself trying to wrap my head around what I saw. I'm 33 years old now, yet I still find myself trying to rationalize what I crossed paths with that night. It feels good to get this out there and somewhat off my chest. I hope someone finds something helpful in this experience, and I hope this sort of thing never happens again. If you've experienced encounters of your own, we would love to hear about it. Please feel free to send them to us at sleepsomniastories@gmail.com.